So Frieda Beast, the band, contacted me and they saw what I've been doing with neural networks and thought like if I would be interested in taking one of their songs and making something with it. So this is always very welcome to me because sound is it's like data, and that can influence what my models do. So in a way it becomes just another data stream that that can change parameters in the output. So in a way, I had carte blanche. I could do whatever I wanted. So obviously, I wanted to play with models that I had already trained. So in this case, I wanted to generate faces. So I wanted to have this engine which is able to produce infinite amount of, let's say, half realistic looking faces. So initially I had trained a model which takes biometric face markers. Well, you know, they're like in your passport. So there are, again, other machine learning models which you give it a photo and it will tell you, okay, this is where the edges of your mouth are, here are your eyes. So you get, I don't know how many, 60 points. So it's really, and so with these 60 points, you can train the model and say, if I give you these 60 points, you have to generate me this photo of a person. So it's always this kind of process. I give it some data and it tries to, from that little data, it tries to reimagine all the missing information. And obviously that's not a lot of information. So again, the model makes mistakes, simplifies things, but now I have this model where I can pass it face points and I get faces out. So then I have other models I can run on top of that. So I pass in the face data, I get out a proto face, you could say. It's really like a very simplified way. They don't have wrinkles and they look, because I trained it really on just female faces, I harvested from Tumblr. They look female or somewhat, they don't have hair because the face markers don't tell you about hair. So all you get is kind of this area. So hair is always kind of, the model says, let's not talk about hair. So you would have to have actually a hair model anyway. So, but I can then train another model where I say, okay, refine me this basic model. So I can pass whatever the first model has generated to another one where I say, if I give you this protoface, add me more details. So try to make hair, try to make wrinkles, try to get some expression into these dull faces. Again, so you train it and you get out a next step where it looks almost more real. So, and I can play with variants like trying, okay, maybe instead of training it on female faces, I train it on male faces, or I train it on something, I don't know, usually it's that. So what I do, I take the sound and analyze the sound as well. So I can use a neural network to find things that sound similar within the song. So, because I don't want to have randomness in there. I would like to have some kind of structure. So whenever it comes back to a part it has already heard, I wanted to do kind of something like in a melody where you see, oh yeah, it did that before. Also, I can trigger, in this case, how the face moves. So when I get beats, I can say, oh, move the head, or open the eyes, or do something like totally destroy the points. That's the fun part, because I can't give the model also like a totally jumbled face coordinates, but it will still try to make sense of that. And then, you see parts like a mouth, but there might be no eyes anymore. So, and that's where I can play around with parameters, see how much of the sound should I use, like how much should the sound influence what the face does. And I think in the Frieda Beast case, I also use style transfer, which kind of not a big fan of. Style transfer is this technique where make this photo look like it's painted by Van Gogh or by whatever painting you trained it on. And I'm really not a big fan of it, but you can also, of course, train that style transfer on not fine art, but something like a random photo found somewhere. So I actually had like run the whole like the style transfer model through 50,000 images, and then because it behaves differently with every image you give it, so and then I pick, I don't know, 5 of those where I think yes, it doesn't look like style transfer so much, it looks like an interesting layer on top. So then it's really like playing with Lego. So I have all these different types of possibilities, what the model can generate, but then I let the model decide. So say, okay, now in this part of the music you combine this model with this and add some layer on top of it, but when in the next part of the song, well, go back to this, and so then it really jumps. So all I did is train the model and then press the button, and in the end I get a video out. So that's the fun part. So I actually did not do any manual editing. That was kind of the whole point also, that I let the model decide what, like obviously I went through a lot of iterations where I said, no, this is too fast, this is too slow, this is not interesting enough. But in the end, I press a button and it starts combining it. And then I say, yes, well, I like it. This is it. I think for generating the face, just like for the initial model, maybe 50,000, 100,000, around that. I guess it's. I stopped counting. I have this whole folders full of categorized images in different themes. So I have female faces, male faces, objects, architecture, electron microscope. So it's really like and continuous. So, and I always go back to them. I add to them. So it's kind of my repertoire of things, and then I can pick between them and mix them and see. Because obviously the technology evolves too, so things get better, get higher resolution. So I go back and train a model again on the old information, because it might give me, I don't know, less artifacts or so. Yeah, there's the I don't know if that's already a good point to come to. Well, okay, let's try. There is this whole field of artifacts that these models generate, which when you look at them the first time, like when I'm sitting there, have a new model and I go, wow, I've never seen this before. This is very interesting. The more I work with them over days or weeks, the more, I'm starting to see that certain artifacts are always there and I don't want them. They give this whole thing a very typical kind of cliche kind of look. So it makes it very recognizable as, oh yeah, this is coming from this model. It's like almost like Instagram filters, or where you say, oh yeah, this color is this kind of, you use this filter on it, and I don't like that. So over time I'm getting kind of bored of my own stuff. So, and there are certain things that I'm working hard on to try the model not to do them, but these are difficult things. It's almost like, you try to take a black and white film and make color photo from it. So there are some limits where this architecture then doesn't cut it. So I have to hope for some scientists to come up with a better architecture. Of course, I try to myself too to change the architecture, to reduce certain effects and emphasize other things. So I'm working on multiple fronts there. So it's like I'm building again, like, I don't know, if you have a certain brush and you realize, no, it makes these nasty kind of streaks that you don't want in there. So maybe you cut something off, or you buy a different brush. So the same thing I have to deal with my models and my architectures in trying them to do more what I want or figuring out what I want. So I started diving into this whole working with neural networks about 2.5 years ago when Deep Dream came out. That was this Google project that, well, probably everybody knows, which always generated puppies and eyes everywhere and these very psychedelic colors. That was, but this was the first time. So, and since then, well, I've been learning and applying and getting like taking new models. So pretty much a year ago, the GANs were invented, or let's say a bit earlier, but a year ago, pix-to-pix, which is kind of one GAN, like one GAN architecture I really like to use, because it's kind of this put an image in and you get an image out, and it's very flexible. So that's about a year ago when I started. And well, there are no programs in there in a way like you have Photoshop or Illustrator or so. But what you do is you take so-called frameworks, which are open source projects, which which handle all the processes that you require to do deep learning. So they, well, can allow you to build these architectures. They deal with all these GPU stuff, like sending the data to the graphics card, having it processed there, getting it back. So the frameworks take care of that. And there are now, I don't know, 10, 20 different frameworks. So it's really like, well, it's more what kind of framework are you more comfortable with? So there is, I don't know, TensorFlow, Keras, PyTorch, Torch, Caffe. So, and actually every big company, like especially in the last year, had tried to put their framework on the market, and because, well, all these developers are in high demand, so, and they try to get them to use their framework. So I have certain favorites there, but it's really some models, especially if you, like me, work with models scientists have developed. Sometimes you just have to take what they have built it in. So sometimes I take Torch, sometimes I take TensorFlow, sometimes this, and then try to kind of integrate it into my workflow. Because yes, in the end you have all these modules, and then you throw in something here, you get something out, and then you can pass it on to another framework, depending on what you want to do. So, well, you have to code, of course, you have to program, and right now my favorite language is Python, because it's very kind of benign. So it's not like C++, or so it's not so low level. I like a language that allows me to express what I want to do, but I don't want to kind of go into the cellar and fix every little screw myself. So Python is like a family car which has everything, and C++ is like an old Porsche where, well, you mostly sit in your workshop and try to fix whatever, and then of course, yes, you overtake everybody, but well, you can only do that every 2 weeks, because most of the time you're fixing. I prefer, well, I write 10 lines of code and it does something, and it might not be as fast, but for me it's more like, yeah, finding the right language to be able to express what you want to do, and I don't want to have too much friction in there, because that part can be tedious. It's right now, I mean, yes, coding is enjoyable, but sometimes it's also just, oh, when have I finished this part? Like you have to build all the prerequisites first, so eventually you start seeing things. But no, you first load images, turn them, like change stuff there, so, or, well, add some more complicated algorithms. Oh, so yeah, it's pleasure and pain. So, but yeah, there are no kind of off-the-shelf solutions, and I would never, I mean, they will come. I mean, people will integrate all this neural stuff into consumer software. Of course, I hope by then I have moved on, because yes, I mean, the nice thing is, of course, that not that many people can do it right now. So I have a lot of space for myself. At some point, this type of stuff that I'm doing right now, no, will just become popular culture, and or like now it looks new, and in 5 years everybody will look at it and say, oh wow, God, that late what is it, that 2017 stuff, oh yeah, it looks so old. So I hope I have developed further by then. Tabs are spaces. Yeah, well, I use a software which kind of doesn't care. I mean, I use the tab key, but right now it converts it into spaces, I think, because I usually, okay, actually yes, I'm a tab person, but because for me it's much more logical, but I actually have it converted to spaces because, but yeah, it doesn't make sense to like press 4 times when you could press just once. So yeah, tabs. But I know Sheldon is definitely, I think, I don't know, was Sheldon a tab? Or I think he's also for tabs, but, or I don't know, yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I forgot. I just read about it and said, oh damn, actually the cool guys use spaces. But anyway, yeah. Okay, Deep Dream, well, the most important thing about Deep Dream was that, at least from my point of view, it was the first time that source code for something that dealt with images was put in the public domain or in open source, so I could actually look at it and see what's happening. Because before Deep Dream I had kind of been working with machine learning, but I kind of didn't dare to go into this framework. It was all very still inaccessible, very scientific, very low level, and there's always this kind of hurdle you have to take at some point. But I always said, okay, I will do it later. But Deep Dream, I mean, first of all, maybe you still remember it, but the first time you saw these Deep Dream images, it was kind of like, what is this? I've never seen something like this before. How can I do this? So, and I'm not somebody who learns from books or reading manuals. I'm learning from looking at other people's code. So I also can't read papers scientific. I mean, I can read them, but for me it's easier to look at a piece of code and then understand what's going on. So that's what Deep Dream did for me. I saw it and said, oh, now this is how it's working. And then I could start making my own modifications to it. Because there were certain issues with Deep Dream, like the psychedelic colors, kind of after a while, like people say, oh God, like with Deep Dream it took maybe just like 3 or 4 months when people got already like bored of the look and say, oh, don't show me this again, it's Deep Dream again. So I tried to tweak it so it doesn't have this cliche look. So for example, I trained it on my own data again, because most people, what they did, they took the default model that came in the box, which was the puppy slug model, like lots of dogs, lots of animals, so everything you put through it became puppy slugs. And so I trained it on album covers, and there came funny things out of, like, I don't know, I had the heavy metal or death metal category, and then every image you put it through, like every face turned into a skull. Or I don't know, I trained it on typography, and then what I get out is things that look like woodcuts and engravings. So you already had quite some ways to control it. The other thing I did was kind of to do lobotomy on the model. So one thing Deep Dream does, well, it looks at an image, and wherever it sees something that fits a certain category, it emphasizes that category. But, well, maybe in one part it sees an eye, it makes a dog's eye, in another part it sees fur, it improves fur. So what I did with my lobotomy is say, well, forget everything but only, you don't know, like, ignore everything but eyes. So just emphasize one category and don't, like, focus. So, and that gave me some interesting results which did not have the typical look. So one thing that happened, there was an exhibition in, like actually it was a charity auction in San Francisco for the Gray Area Foundation, and they invited artists that had been working with Deep Dream and to provide art that would be auctioned off to support their work. And well, so I made some pieces for that, and well, actually I think they sold for a few $1,000s, which was nice. So, But yes, so after a while, of course, new models came along. So then I moved on from Deep Dream. But yes, I'm eternally thankful for Deep Dream for kind of starting it off. Yeah, it's a sad story with Flash. I mean, it has a real bad name now, but actually for me it was the perfect tool in its time, because it was actually combining everything. You could do code, you could do visuals, you could do video, sound, like everything in one piece, and it ran everywhere. So I was a big fan, and it allowed me to do a lot of things. And unfortunately, a lot of these things are now defunct. And so I know there was, well, some of my favorite pieces actually, Islands of Consciousness was this eternal movie. It took images from Flickr and made kind of these movies out of it by having something like an infinite magnetic tape onto which it would render the images and then combine it with what's already there, and then it almost generated stories. And unfortunately, for example, this piece is dead now because, first of all, Flickr changed their API, so it doesn't get, and, well, Flash is blocked in the browser. So there are some projects, actually. I think right now people are trying to invent a kind of an emulator where it reads a Flash file and then reinterprets it with JavaScript, and so you can rerun it. Yeah, it's a big problem because I have lots of code. I mean, I've worked with Flash for more than 10 years, so it was a long period, and I did a lot of things there, which it's a bad thing to say, but yes. So it's a generation thing. So. And probably when we did Flash, some older people said, "Oh, you're just repeating what we did 10 years ago." But now I look at what, like, now generative art is very, very trendy, and like lots of kids are doing it. And well, I look at this and I can constantly go and say, "Oh yes, but I did this 15 years ago and but I stopped doing that." It's because in the end, back then I was in the same position. I was reinventing the wheel. But sometimes you make something actually new. So, and yes, it's sad. I would like to be able to kind of show it, or, well, I guess the best way is to take the old algorithms and just implement them in a new platform. So that's kind of what I'm doing. It's like, well, the 2018 remix of something. Really, like if like pop stars do a new recording of an old album. I guess that's kind of what's going to happen. Running the old stuff, well, maybe on an old machine that still has everything, it's possible. But yeah, it's hard to find now. Lots of the things I've done, I cannot really show. I mean, I can show them on my local computer because it still runs. And it still runs. That's the fascinating thing. So Flash was that good. It's still, most of the stuff still is running, but just not for many people to see. Coming back to the beginning, I only started calling myself an artist after I stopped doing Flash. So that was, the death of Flash was also kind of my birth as an artist. Like as an artist who's called, I mean, in a way I always was, but let's say the official artist. So in the end, yes, let's call it early sketches, or it's kind of, you can maybe see a development there, but I think the good stuff, or the treasures that I think are still good, I rather re-implement them or rebuild them with my knowledge that I have now. And because yes, that's the nice thing about algorithms. They are like ideas, and I can take the same algorithm and make it work in a different setting again. So. Islands of Consciousness, well, works well, my metaphor is, you imagine you have a tape loop, like old school videotape, but it's a loop thing. So at some point it comes back to the beginning, and what you do is you start recording images onto that loop. Let's say because it's still images, I can only move or zoom in, so it records over the tape. But while it's recording, it's not perfectly recording over it, but it takes the information that is already in there, the previous recorded material, and merges it with the incoming material. What also happens, it sometimes can skip, or it runs the tape backwards, or speeds it up, or slows it down. So what you get is kind of this collage of weird, of data that gets mixed up in this loop. So that gives all kinds of different visual appearances, because yes, I can also change colors and things. So it's, you never really get the images out that you put in. But so that is kind of the technical background of the player. But the interesting part is the images, like the data that comes in, and that comes from Flickr. So there's the Flickr API, which I can query and look for certain tags. So, well, when it starts up, it just says to Flickr, give me a random picture. The nice thing about Flickr images is they usually are tagged. So people have said, okay, this is a house, it's nature, or I don't know, it's in the US, or it's my baby. So what it does is, so it downloads the image, the first one, looks at the tags, picks one, and does a search on Flickr, give me an image of a house. So the next image that comes in is then hopefully a house. But that house might be also, I don't know, house, Christmas, wedding, I don't know. So whatever people tag. Of course, there are certain tendencies in what people tag. So, and that's what then happens. So maybe you start in the house loop and you get lots of images that show architecture. But at some point, maybe it switches to the inside of the house because, I don't know, it was Christmas Eve. And suddenly you are in a cluster where you get lots of Christmas images, but then suddenly, I don't know, it's a tree and it switches back and you're in the woods because that tree, the next tree you got was some kind of trip to the countryside. And so this is where, well, from this seemingly random amount of images, when we perceive this, we start trying to make sense of it, and we tell a story, what might be going on there. Interestingly, like in lots of the stories it has generated often are of a kind of a mysterious, creepy nature, because, well, sometimes you get these smiling faces and then suddenly, I don't know, you see an empty street at night, or, I don't know, a car crash, and obviously, like, oh, you first see, oh, this was the happy days, and then suddenly, oh yes, this is how, well, the machine did never put it in, but we make up the, well, we cannot help it. We try to make sense out of anything we see. That's what how our brains are hardwired. So, and that's kind of how my art works. And like anything I do is kind of, well, I present you with something that at first might not make any sense, but you desperately try to find meaning in it. And, well, statistically, most people then will find similar meaning in what they see, because, I don't know, they see something like a face, and and the face might look sad, because statistically there are certain things that make a face look sad or happy, or you have two faces juxtaposed, so you start wondering what's going on between those two persons, and you try to analyze the little details in there, and I think that's actually how my art works too, because once you make sense for yourself out of an image, it makes you happy. I guess there's a reward in our brain for solving an image. And so the more difficult an image is, the more reward you get. And so I try to steer in this space where at first sight, well, you don't know really what to make of it, but at some point you start recognizing things, and then, well, at least that's how it works for me. And then I'm saying, oh yes, actually, yeah, this makes sense, and show me more. Go like a drug. Well, I can't speak about the future. I guess they will get better and better at simulating kind of this type of behavior and trying to make sense out of things, but it's always based on what we have taught them. So, well, again, of course, what we know is also only what we have been taught. So right now, indeed, the machines are just, for me, like inspirational tools, or, well, they offer me something, but it's me who makes sense out of it, or who curates, who picks. So the machine is just able to do it very fast within a certain space of variations. But yeah, the machine is just kind of a very advanced form of statistics. So, but, well, the statistics are based on the real world. And the more real world information we feed into it, the closer we will get to something that might appear to us like it has human behaviors. But there's maybe the controversial point that I think that human behaviors is also just kind of a statistical kind of effect. So I don't believe that there is magic going on in our heads. So it is all, like, it's very complex, but the machine can be very complex too. And out of complex things, well, again, when you combine it with pattern recognition, like the same thing in our heads, you get these feedback loops where things start making sense or statistically making sense.